Hi there, it is July 28th, 2024, and this is Alan Zundell bringing you Political Dharma once again. I'm going to be talking about how the non-major party presidential candidates are doing this last week, focusing specifically on their attempts to gain ballot access in the various states, and then turning towards how they're doing in the polls, especially after the Trump assassination attempt, the Republicans' National Convention, Biden dropping out of the race, and Kamala Harris emerging as the front runner in the attempt to get the Democratic Party's nomination. So a lot went on in the last couple of weeks, and we want to see where the alternative presidential candidates now stand in terms of ballot access and in terms of public opinion polling about who registered voters might actually vote for if the election were held right now. So let's turn first to ballot access cases, and I have some news about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, who's another independent candidate for the presidency, and then what's going on in the Libertarian Party. Haven't seen much news about how the Green Party and their candidate Jill Stein is doing in gaining more ballot access. Doesn't seem to be any progress in the last week. I'll have a little bit more to say about the Green Party at the end of this particular segment. So let's turn first to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he did get ballot access in Louisiana by paying the required $500 filing fee. He didn't need to collect any signatures at all. And I can't see why any of the candidates would not be able to get on the ballot in Louisiana, which was such a low filing fee. And in Nevada, where Kennedy turned in his second set of signatures a couple of weeks ago. Now, if you remember, Kennedy had originally turned in more than enough signatures in Nevada to get on the ballot, but then the Nevada Secretary of State said that those petitions didn't qualify because he neglected to put a vice presidential candidate on the forms, even though one of their clerks had told him earlier he didn't have to do that. So the Kennedy campaign went out and collected a whole new set of signatures and turned them in, and now Nevada has approved those signatures, said he has enough valid signatures to appear on the ballot, so he will be on the ballot in Nevada. On the other hand, for every step forward, there is a step back with challenges to ballot access where he's already met the requirements. Now, in Texas, the Democratic Party has challenged him on the grounds that a lot of his signatures are bad signatures. They're not valid, that they think, like I think they said about 70% of the signatures were invalid. So they are forcing the Secretary of State there to take another look at those and publicizing the idea that he's trying to get on the ballot under some kind of false pretenses. Same thing in Florida. It's the Democratic Party pushing against him there as well. They are challenging how the Reform Party chose him as its presidential nominee to put him on the ballot, on their ballot line. They're saying they want to see the details of how they made that decision for the nominee and make sure it complied with their bylaws, their party bylaws, as well as the rules and regulations of the state. So Democrats, once again, pushing to try to challenge Kennedy on his ballot access. And then in North Carolina, where the North Carolina State Board of Elections had blocked Kennedy at first, but then they allowed Kennedy. They also blocked a lot of other parties and Cornel West as well. But they're now suing the Board of Elections to get Kennedy off the ballot again. And this time it's on the grounds that Kennedy's We the People Party, which has a lower signature, there's a lower signature requirement in North Carolina to get a party on the ballot than there is to get an independent candidate on the ballot. So Kennedy pursued the path of getting the We the People Party on the ballot, and then he's their nominee. The Democrats are saying there in North Carolina that he's really not an independent candidate because he doesn't qualify because he is an independent candidate. So in some places they're saying he's not, some places they're saying he is, but they're saying he is, that the idea of getting We the People Party was only created to reduce the number of signatures. He's really an independent candidate, and the We the People Party has no actual existence as a party. So that's their argument there. So in all those cases, now we're having challenges against Kennedy being on the ballot. It is common for the Democratic Party to challenge those candidates who they think might threaten their ability to win in a particular state. So they're attacking Cornel West, and they've attacked Jill Stein at various times, and they're also attacking Kennedy's attempt to get on the ballot. Now, the Libertarian Party has the opposite problem in that Republicans don't like them. But let's take a look at their ballot access issues, and it includes fights within the party, as I've often mentioned. So let's jump over to Colorado. Now, the backstory on Colorado has been that even though the National Convention chose Chase Oliver as its official nominee, some state parties have been trying to put in somebody else. Now, in Colorado, the chair of the state party, Hannah Goodman, arranged to get Kennedy on the ballot. She said they're going to put Kennedy on the ballot, Kennedy Shanahan instead of Oliver and his running mate Termott. But a member of the Libertarian Party's National Committee, who is also the secretary of the party and lives in Colorado, went ahead and filled out the necessary certified forms and got the electors for the Electoral College to put Chase Oliver on the ballot. And the Colorado Secretary of State confirmed that they did all the proper paperwork. So rather than Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's going to be Chase Oliver and his running mate who will be on the November ballot. And there continues to be contention within the party over the decision of the Colorado Party to try to put Kennedy on the ballot. So as of now, the Secretary of State says the paperwork is there, it's all in order. They're going to have Chase Oliver on the ballot as the Libertarian Party candidate, and the only way they will reverse that decision is if the candidate himself, Chase Oliver, decides to withdraw. That's the only way they were going to change their minds on that. Within the party, there is a second letter coming from those who regarded the decision of the National Convention not to be in proper order, so they hired legal help, and in this case, they are going to, they said they're going to take legal action if the National Committee doesn't respond to this second letter to them. They are saying that Chase Oliver and Mike Termott, his running mate, were not elected properly because there were problems at the National Convention, and there's a lot of that going around within the party. What's next up here, the chairman of the Tennessee Libertarian Party said they're not supporting Chase Oliver either. He's going to support a different candidate. Now, the Tennessee party does not have a ballot line, so this is not going to be a big deal as far as ballot access goes, but it does show something of the turmoil going on within particular state parties. And in Oregon, the Republican Party has asked the Secretary of State to exclude all Libertarian Party nominees from the November ballot on the grounds that the same thing I mentioned just now, that the National Convention and the Libertarian Party there in the state were not following their own rules, so they're saying get them off the ballot and deal with this. Now, I don't think the Secretary of State's going to do that without a court order, but again, it shows the kind of turmoil that's been happening within the party regarding ballot access and the kind of challenges all independent and third-party candidates face from the major parties who, in the Democratic Party's case at least, keep saying they're the saviors of democracy and the defenders of democracy, but they don't like having a lot of competition in elections. Not to the voters' benefit, I would say. Cornel West, the other independent, the other leading independent candidate for the presidency, has made some progress as well, as he's got his own troubles. So let's turn to him now. The Natural Law Party of the United States, which is a rather small party. It only has, I don't think it has ballot access in more than a couple of states, Michigan and Florida, and Mississippi, I believe. Anyway, they said they are going to endorse Cornel West and his running mate for their ballot lines, and they'll put him on the ballot in Florida and Mississippi. So he's got two more states under the belt. And the Natural Law Party in Michigan had nominated Robert F. Kennedy Jr., so they're going a different direction. Now, the interesting thing here in this story, which was from the Independent Political Report, and I should have been telling you where all those stories were from. Sometimes I forget to do that. I do want to give credit to the sources. And a lot of these are from either Ballot Access News or the Independent Political Report. Here it says, later in that article, that the Natural Law Party had called for a National Justice for All party organization after the election. Now, the Justice for All Party is one that was created by Cornel West in order to get ballot access where it's easier to get the party on the ballot, similar to how RFK had created the We the People Party. The Natural Law Party also invited the state parties that had already nominated West to join in this effort to create some kind of umbrella political party. So they're asking the Progressive Party of Oregon, the Aurora Party of Alaska, and wherever Cornel West has been able to get his We the People Party on the ballot, they want them to all be included in some kind of overarching political party framework. Now, how this is going to work, I'm not sure. If all those parties would say they adopt the same platform, it would be maybe difficult because I don't see how the Natural Law Party's background really fits with the Progressive Party or with the Progressive Party and the Aurora Party and the We the People Party, not We the People, but Justice for All Party, Cornel West Party, all seem to have similar platforms. Not sure why the Natural Law Party is jumping aboard the Cornel West train, but in my opinion, we do need, and people often say this, we need some kind of umbrella party organization that can bring all these independent candidates and minor party candidates together so that their vote total in an election can be much higher than it has been. Whenever people are dissatisfied with the two major parties, they're going to turn to one of these. But if they're turning in all kinds of different directions to the different options being presented, none of those are going to be able to build up a vote strong enough to challenge the two-party system. My thought is that the way you get a lot of disparate parties together who have different ideas about their political orientation or the issues that are important and the types of things that usually distinguish parties, rather than making it based on ideology or platform or a particular candidate, have some kind of organization that simply is devoted to the idea that the candidate that gets the most support within that party will then be the nominee of that party. It's a way to get ballot access for whoever wins out in what kind of primary they have. And I would say use a method like star voting. You may have heard of ranked choice voting, which is a way to create a system that does away with spoilers and the split vote problem. That is, where you have two similar parties or two similar candidates who are both vying for the same set of voters' votes, so they get split between them, and it makes them fall behind another candidate who's able to consolidate support of a particular group. Well, star voting is an improvement over ranked choice voting, and if we had a umbrella party organization using star voting to determine who's going to be able to get their ballot line, all the different parties, all the different candidates, all the different factions would have a fair opportunity to advance their case within that party. It would be quite interesting, I think, and model what we should be doing in general elections, using a preferential voting system that avoids spoilers and avoids splitting the vote to the extent possible. That's my opinion. Anyway, was there anything else with Cornel West? I think I gave you, no, I got one more here. Natural Law Party. No, I got two more here. Let's see where we're at down here. In North Carolina, I told you how in North Carolina they had barred, the State Board of Elections had said that even though they brought in a lot of signatures, we have problems with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West and the Green Party, et cetera, Constitution Party. So they allowed the Constitution Party and Kennedy to get on the ballot eventually, but they are still blocking Cornel West. And some of the Cornel West supporters in that state brought a court case. That court case is going to be holding a hearing and determining whether the State Board of Elections is delaying the certification of Cornel West and his Justice for All Party for the ballot for valid reasons or not. And the same kind of thing happened in Michigan, where a Democratic linked group, that is the, I think it's there in the news, this is from the Detroit News, they are challenging Cornel West's petitions to get on the Michigan ballot on the grounds that it's, quote, infested with forged signatures, end quote. And so they are challenging those signatures, even though Cornel West turned in more than twice the number of signatures they needed to get on the ballot. Now they're saying that a lot of those signatures are forged and just not valid. So he's got a problem on his hands there. So as you can see, this is a continuing problem for these alternative candidates just getting on the ballot in these various states. So where are we at with all this? Let's take a look at my running tally of these various top contenders. I'm not going to cover every single candidate for the presidency because there's just too many of them. Most of them you'll never hear of. So you see on this chart, of course, the Republican and Democratic parties have ballot access in all 50 states plus the District of Columbia. Now, following them is a Libertarian Party that, as you just heard, there's contention within the party, and it's not clear at all that all of those ballot lines are going to go to their official nominee, Chase Oliver. Right now, the Libertarian Party, at least to my best count, has 37 ballot lines. It has ballot lines in 37 states, and in at least one state they said they're not going to put Oliver on the ballot, and that's Montana. Colorado was also saying that, but they got beaten to the punch by someone on the National Committee. Following the Libertarian Party, the next candidate with the most ballot access is RFK at 30. With the ones he gained this week, it put him ahead of the Green Party, which is at 28. So RFK is in fourth place now in terms of the number of states where he has ballot access, just about even with the Green Party and actually pulling ahead. Constitution Party, and I don't have a lot to say about them. They got it in 15 states, and in 2 of those, they're not going to put the official nominee on the ballot. Cornel West, however, is catching up to the Constitution Party. He's got 12 states within his armor, within his zero case. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but he's got 12 states where he has ballot access, or at least has met the requirements to get on the ballot. Doesn't always mean that the state has certified those, etc. Claudia de la Cruz of the Socialist, I forget now, Libertarian and Liberty, and I forgot what the name of the party is. Sorry, I am getting more up in the years like Joe Biden and Donald Trump and mixing things up more often. Anyway, she's, as far as I know, she's still at about 9 states, and not all those have been certified. So the ones I've mostly been covering are the ones that are higher up on the list. Now with the Green Party, as I said, there hasn't been a lot of ballot access progress to report in the last few weeks, but I do want to remind you that their convention is coming up in a couple of weeks, and that's from Thursday, August 15th through Sunday the 18th. Jill Stein, their candidate 2 times before, is almost certainly going to be their nominee. But in this year, there's been so many surprises, we don't know what's going to happen. But I would expect the Green Party is going to nominate Jill Stein, who's been working very hard at her campaign. And the other thing I wanted to say about that was if you have any inside information or you know of good sources for what's going on within the Green Party, similar to the sources I found for the Libertarian Party, please let me know. Now, it's strange that I don't have better access to anything that might be going on in the inner workings of the Stein campaign or the Green Party because I was a member of the Green Party. I was very active here in Oregon for a few years. I was actually on the state committee, and I was the secretary of the party, and I was a candidate for statewide office. And I also wrote a book about the Green Party, about the early history of the party and how it first got established. You can find that on Amazon, by the way. I think it's called The Early History of the Green Party in the United States, or The Origins of the Green, something like that. But my name as an author, you can look for it on Amazon. But you'd think I'd have more information on them, and I don't. They don't seem to air their dirty laundry in public insofar as I can find it. I do know a few years ago there's a lot of fight over the nomination because some felt the process was rigged in favor of the guy who eventually emerged as the nominee, Howie Hawkins, longtime Green Party member, one of the founders actually. So that's why I don't have a lot on the Green Party. I just haven't heard a lot about what's going on within the party. I do know Jill Stein is campaigning, but I haven't been covering campaigns so much as ballot access and signs that they're going to be a major factor in the election in one way or another. All right, then, how are we doing in the polls, or how are they doing in the polls? Let's take a look at that. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to give you on that is the ballot access deadlines. As I've been tracking them, you see here, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has met the deadline for getting on the ballot in every state so far. And that's from March, early in the year, all the way through July. But if you look down at the bottom of that first set of columns, he's only got access in a few of the states whose deadline is August 1st, which is coming up this Thursday. So he's got several states to qualify for there. And then immediately afterwards, on Friday, August 2nd, there's also another state, but he's got ballot access there, okay? That's Washington. But then following that, on August 5th, there's more states that have deadlines. So as you can see, within the next week or two, he's going to have to meet the deadline for several states. So he's got a lot of work to do. There should be picking up the pace here if he's actually going to get on all 50 state ballots, plus the District of Columbia. Cornel West there, he's got a lot of gaps in his record. He's managed to get on the ballot in several states through minor party nominations, very minor party nominations, but he's missed deadlines in several other states. So he's not going to be on the ballot in too many states, I don't think. Let's turn now to the polls. This first one I want to show you is from Yahoo, where they did a poll. I forget, they partnered up with some organization. Well, let me take a minute here, though, first to talk about polls in a more generic sense, because every time I talk about polls, I get some pushback on that from people who say that they don't trust polls. And that's fine. If you think the polls are not really accurately reflecting how people are going to vote, you're not the only one. So there are problems with public opinion polls, especially those that are not run according to political science methods. That is, sometimes campaigns run so-called polls where the questions are deliberately biased, or they're really used to, they present themselves as a poll when they phone people, when they're really trying to persuade people to vote one way or another. So excluding those types of polls, when you get to those that are associated with academic institutions or well-established institutions that have been doing this for a while and use the most advanced research methods to do polls, they can be very accurate, but there are always problems in them. Now, they have biases, and that doesn't mean that they're deliberately trying to skew it in favor of a candidate or a party. What that means is there's always problems with trying to get a representative sample of voters. If you don't trust the results of polls, that's your privilege. I don't completely trust them myself, but you can't substitute for that for this kind of very careful methodology that's been built up over the decades. You can't just substitute your own judgment for that and say, well, because I've talked to a lot of people or none of my friends have said that, everybody I know is going to vote for so-and-so, because you have to have a representative sample of the larger public. You don't know, well, how many million people are voters in the United States. What they do is they select a smaller group according to what's called a random sample. And a random sample does not mean haphazard or whoever you chance across. It means everybody in the larger population, that is every voter in the United States, has an equal chance of being selected for questioning. Now, the problem is there's built-in biases because they use telephones to reach people. Not everybody answers their phone, especially from unknown callers. So there will be a bias towards people who are more prone to pick up their phone. Do people who pick up their phone and take calls from strangers, are they more likely to be leaning towards one party or candidate than another? We don't really have a clear way of knowing that. Maybe somebody has figured it out. I haven't heard, and I sure don't know how they would fix that. And there's similar problems like that. There's problems with questions. If you've inadvertently asked a question in a way that's ambiguous, that people misinterpret, that can cause a problem. Of course, polls are not predictions. How people answer a poll is not what they really think, it's what they say to the pollster, and they may change their mind overnight, they may change their mind within months, so it's not a prediction, it's simply an attempt to measure what people say, not what they really think or what they're really going to do, but what they say at a particular time. And then finally, whatever the finally was, I forgot, there's probably something else I wanted to say about that, but I will, at the end of this segment, give you, one of my viewers actually raised a very good question about how polls are, how their questions are structured. And that is a known issue within polling, but he raised a question that I've never seen raised before. And I'll give you that at the end of this particular segment. So let's go back to that Yahoo poll. And the reason I'm starting with this one, because they were conducting this survey on July 19th through the 22nd. Now, Joe Biden dropped out of the race on July 21st and then endorsed Kamala Harris. So in the middle of polling, they found that the Democratic Party nominee had changed. So what they did is they sorted out the earlier polling responses from the later polling responses to try to get a sense of how it may have changed from Biden to Harris. Now, as you see there on the left side, Joe Biden's got about 41% of the total vote of, that is, respondents to the polls saying they they would vote for Joe Biden if the election were held today and all these candidates were on the ballot. And Donald Trump has about 43%. If you look over to the right-hand side there, after Kamala Harris was endorsed by Biden, same thing, 41% for Harris and 43% for Donald Trump. And all the rest match as well. Kennedy's getting 5% in this poll, Cornel West getting 1%, Jill Stein getting 1%. Now Chase Oliver, he's gone from 0% to 1%. That may be because people are becoming more familiar with him now that he's the official nominee of the party. And it could also just be a statistical artifact. There's a margin of error, which has to do with the statistical relationship between the size of your polling subjects and the size of the population you're interested in. That give you a margin of error of how much it can be off, and that's within the margin of error. So in this case, no change at all from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, at least early in the process. You would think there would be a bump in favor of Kamala Harris because people are excited. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute, but let's compare that to the Quinnipiac poll from that same period. Quinnipiac also conducted a poll from July 19th to the 21st, and they got very similar results. Now, if you look up there on the left and compare Yahoo to Biden on the Quinnipiac poll, there's a difference. In Yahoo, he got 41%, and in Quinnipiac, he got 39%. Donald Trump has barely changed at all, 43 in one case, 44 in the other. Now, the 3-point difference between, no, it's a 2-point difference between 41% and 39% for Biden is within the margin of error as well. So that's really no change at all. And the rest, the alternative candidates, Kennedy got 8% in Quinnipiac as opposed to 5% in Yahoo. And some of the candidates like Cornel West and Jill Stein got 2% instead of 1%. That's within the margin of error. Same thing with Chase Oliver, who got 0% in the one poll and 1% in the other. That's all within the margin of error. Now, Kennedy seems a little bit bigger of a jump from 5% to 8%, but again, that's within the margin of error. Not, it may be a slight difference, but it really doesn't mean much of anything. Now, why I'm comparing them is if you get different polls run by different companies with different respondents, and they're getting very similar answers, well, then you could have a higher level of confidence that the results actually reflect what they're being told. If you jump over to the right-hand side where we now have Harris as the candidate, there's not a lot of change there either. Very close in all cases. Kennedy's a little bit closer in the Quinnipiac poll to the Yahoo poll in the case of Harris. He's just 6%, which is much closer to the 5% they're getting in the Yahoo poll. So in that case, there doesn't seem to be much difference whatsoever between those two polls done at two different times. Now, there are a lot of polls done, so I'm going to quickly go through a few more to see how they compare with that Yahoo poll. Let's turn now to one that was the top one there on the left-hand side, you see the Yahoo poll that you just saw, and then on the right-hand side at the top, there's the National Public Radio, Public Broadcasting System / Marist poll. Marist is a college that runs public opinion polls. And when you compare those, you see they're very close. They're very, very close, within 3% margin of error easily. Harris on one side's got 41%, on the other side 42%. Trump's at 43 on one side, 42 on the other. Kennedy's at 5% in the Yahoo poll, 7% in the Marist poll, and the rest are about 1% all the way down the line. So very similar Yahoo poll and the NPR PBS Marist poll, which was conducted on July 22nd. And then we see at the bottom there, the New York Times also did a poll. New York Times poll was done from July 22nd to July 24th, so just a couple of days after the earlier poll. And in this case, again, you don't see any difference. It's virtually the same. Harris, 41 on the one side, 42 on the other. Trump, 43% on one side, 42 on the other. Kennedy, let's see, he's got 5% on one side, 6% on the other. The New York Times poll says that some of these other candidates like Stein and West and Oliver, they get in some cases less than a percentage or less than 0.5%. That may be just a more fine-grained way of measuring it, whereas on the other side they probably round it up to 1%. But so there's no big change there either. So the Yahoo poll's agreeing with the Quinnipiac poll, the Marist poll, and the New York Times Siena poll. Siena is another academic institution that does these pollings. But if you look at the bottom of the page there, they included a question which I thought was interesting from the standpoint of the non-major party candidates, and they selected out those who did not say they were going to vote for Harris or Trump at first, and they told them this is the people who, when you're asking which way they lean, they would not choose either Harris or Trump. When they asked them if you had to choose between those two candidates, who would you choose? And they're saying Harris at 29%, which is much smaller than her support in the general population, Donald Trump at 35%, and don't know at 36%. So they haven't made up their mind yet, and there's a pool of voters there waiting for one of the minor party candidates to pick them up. So I thought that was worth mentioning, at least. I'll have a couple other things that are specific to RFK in particular as we go through this. Okay, before I get to RFK, let's do one more set of polls in comparison to the Yahoo polls, one from Ipsos and the other one from the Wall Street Journal. And again, we're going to see a lot of similarity. If you look at the Yahoo poll on the left, and the right has the Ipsos poll at the top and the Wall Street Journal poll at the bottom, all comparing them from the standpoint of registered voters. You see over there in Ipsos compared to Yahoo, very, very similar. And I highlighted the column on registered voters because that's the one that's comparable to the Yahoo poll, not just the total number of respondents, the total number of the population, but those who are actually registered to vote. And we see Harris at 41-1, 42 in the other. Donald Trump is a little bit lower in the Ipsos poll than in the Yahoo poll. He gets 43% in Yahoo and 38% in Ipsos. So that's 5% difference, which means that it's outside the margin of error, I believe, or it may be within it. I think it is, because you'd have to break it down. They did a large poll with a higher number of respondents, and then they had to narrow it down to just the registered voters. So the margin of error might have been bigger than the standard one, but it may indicate that Trump actually has a little less support there than he did a day or two earlier, or something different between those. Kennedy, he's at about 8% on Ipsos and 5% on Yahoo, so they're very similar as well. Now down at the bottom, Wall Street Journal, I've highlighted Harris and Kennedy because I want to make sure you know they're not in the same order as they were on the left-hand side. But if you look at Trump, 43 on the left, 44 on the right, very similar. Harris, 41% in the Yahoo poll, and over there on the right for the Wall Street Journal, 45%. So that is about 4 percentage points higher. So they're showing a little bit higher indication, not big, hardly big at all. And Kennedy's about the same, 5% versus 4%. So about the same in both polls. Now, I also highlighted in that one in the Wall Street Journal down in the left, excuse me, once again, down in the right at the bottom, they also showed the difference between this recent poll done on July 25th, 2024, with an earlier poll done on July 2nd, 2024, and then even earlier on February 28th, 2024. And you can see Donald Trump's support has changed slightly. He's gone from February at 40% to early July 42, and July 25th at 44. Now that rise may reflect a lot of things that went on in the interim, but probably there's a bump from the assassination attempt, giving him a lot of people giving him more sympathy, and the GOP convention putting the campaign in people's faces. So, people are more aware that he's running. So very slight improvement. Harris, on the other hand, there's a big jump. February and July, she's at about 35, 36%. That is early July. But then July 25th, she jumped up about 10 points to 45%. So what we see there is, of course, that Biden dropping out and Harris coming in, she gets a lot more support than she would have without Biden in the race. So that's her standing with the voters improved because she became an actual nominee, an actual candidate who's going to be on the ballot. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., you show a slight decline over time. February, he was about 9% in this particular poll. Early July, he was down to 7%, and then July 25th, he's down to 4%, so down 5 percentage points, which is kind of big, even in terms of this. Not huge, but this shows a steady decline. And you can think, just like comparing different polls from different organizations, if they're similar, you can have more confidence in it. If the same output is doing the same poll in the same way, but it's finding a difference over time, that difference is probably real. You could say that Kennedy's numbers should be higher, but whether they're higher or lower, they would show a decline if you're doing that same poll from month to month to month. So that's what I want to say about that. There probably is a decline, and I will show you evidence of that in a minute. Let's turn now specifically to New York Times as it bears upon Kennedy's campaign. And here, this was a strange question. They asked, who would I guess this is before Biden actually endorsed Harris, and she had that big bump up. I'm not sure. Let's see, July. Yeah, it may have been before that, or before she really consolidated support behind her, as she did very quickly, actually. But this was asking Democratic voters or people who lean towards the Democratic candidate who they would prefer to be picked as the nominee if Joe Biden's not going to be the nominee. And we see Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, at the top with 7%, with 10%, and then Michelle Obama, the wife of former President Barack Obama, at 7%. But then you see Kamala Harris and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tied at 5%. So when people were asked, this is Democrats and Democrat-leaning voters, when they're asked who they'd like to see replace Biden, just as many said Kennedy as Harris. And I thought that was an interesting point, and it shows the level of support he could have had within the party if he had stayed in and Biden dropped out. But that's, the party poobahs would never have allowed him, I don't think. And then finally, let's look at this. Comparing the Quinnipiac poll to the New York Times Siena poll, this is specifically on the question Robert F. Kennedy Jr. At the top, all they asked was, is your opinion of Kennedy favorable or unfavorable? And we see a very high unfavorability rating. Now they're collapsing. What are usually asked is somewhat unfavorable and very unfavorable. They're collapsing it into one category, black and white, favorable or unfavorable. Here he's getting, in the Quinnipiac poll done recently, he's getting a total of 23% favorable and 45% unfavorable, 30% haven't heard enough. But if you compare that to the Quinnipiac poll, if you compare that Quinnipiac poll to the New York Times Siena poll on the bottom, it shows in that first line, July 22 through 24, 2024, and at the next line it's going to be going back a year, it shows that people had an either very favorable or somewhat favorable opinion of Kennedy. That's 31% and 7%, adds up to 38%, which is much higher than the 23% that the Quinnipiac poll gave him. So in the New York Times Siena poll, he's showing 38% favorability overall, but in Quinnipiac, that's only 23%. So there's some big difference in these two polls and how they were conducted, or how they, how people were answering this. That does give you some pause to ask what's going on here. Now, on the other hand, the somewhat unfavorable and the very unfavorable in the New York Times Siena poll add up to, let's see, 22% plus 19% would be 41%. And then up there, he's getting an unfavorability at 45%. So that's pretty comparable. 41% in one case, 45 in the other. And then there's another strange one. The Quinnipiac poll, haven't heard enough, is at 30%, but down there, haven't heard enough is 7%. And refused or don't know is 15%. So those two categories tended to get blurred together. But even if you put together haven't heard of and don't know or refused, Quinnipiac has it at 33%, and the New York Times Siena poll has it at just 22%. So something very different in the favorability ratings of Kennedy between these two different polls. The other thing I wanted to call your attention to was in 2023, a year ago, they asked the same question. The New York Times Siena poll asked the same question about favorability towards Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And you see there's a lot of comparison that he's, the same numbers say very favorable, same numbers say, about the same numbers say somewhat favorable, exactly the same numbers say very unfavorable, and then never heard of is pretty comparable. But the one that's changed is somewhat unfavorable. It's gone from 15% in 2023, July of 2023, to 22% in July of 2024. Now, why would people have a more unfavorable opinion of Kennedy in a year's time? Well, he's been taking a hammering in the mainstream media as they continue to portray him as a fringe candidate, as somebody who's anti-science, who's somebody who's conspiratorial-minded, and giving a very distorted picture of him in the press. I'm sure it has something to do with that, if there's any validity to these figures at all. So that is what I have as far as polling. All right, what we're seeing so far is not a big change between Biden and Harris in terms of the way people vote. Kenley is down much lower than he needs to be to get in the next debate scheduled to be in September that both Harris and Trump have said they would participate in. Kenley would have to get at least 15% in 4 qualifying polls. So no matter what you think his real standing is, he's got to be measured in those polls as being 15% or better. And he's down there around the 6% range, according to all these polls. And I show you a very large number of them. He's somewhere between 5% and 8%, I think. So he's got to double that at least, and probably even more than that to get into that. I hope he does it. And, things can change fast. As I said, Harris got a big bump now that the Democratic Party is consolidated around her. First, she was endorsed by Biden, and then Biden's campaign committee that already had money in the bank, they all went over to Harris. And then the big donors suddenly opened their pocketbooks. They were withholding money from Biden to try to edge him out, and now they're all going over to Harris. And then Harris is using that money to just slam voters with emails asking for more money. And the enthusiasm level among Democrats has risen for Harris. I think just because she's not Joe Biden, she's not old. Otherwise, I'm not sure how much of they know of her distinction with Biden in terms of policy issues or anything like that. So Harris is getting a big bump from the fact that she's not Biden, and the Democrats have become a lot more enthused about the race. They were depressed. They were feeling like Biden, the general public is feeling he's too old, and the general public is saying that he shouldn't be president. So that was depressing the Democrats as well. More Democrats were willing to back Biden, of course, than other people who are independents or Republicans. But now they're even more enthusiastic. So they're probably going to turn out to vote unless Harris screws this up or some other event happens that nobody knows and nobody can predict. And that's been happening a lot. So I don't want to be too firm in my opinions about this. Anyway, so do I have anything else for you? I did forget to put something in, so I had to record it afterwards and come back and splice it in. And that was the question, that was the something raised by one of my viewers about polling questions that I wanted to relay to you. This viewer was Richard Stone, and he said a very interesting thing, which was when you word the question, who would you vote for if the election was held today, and they give you a list of all the candidates, you are likely already to know that candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or Jill Stein, or Cornel West, or Chase Oliver, they're not showing very high results in the polls that have already been taken. So you're less likely to consider them serious candidates, and you're going to say, well, if the election was held today and nobody else was going to vote for Kennedy, I would probably vote for Harris or Trump, because otherwise my vote would be wasted. I wouldn't be doing any good with it. Now, what if you had asked that question differently and said, which candidate would you prefer to win in the election? There they would say, okay, I can disregard whatever, voting on the basis of who I think has a chance of winning. I can say who I'd really like to win. I think these alternative candidates would do much better in a poll like that, creating a virtuous cycle in which people see they're doing better in the polls, so they're more likely to take them seriously. And in the next poll, when you ask them again, they would give a higher response because they're taking a closer look at those alternatives. So rather than a vicious cycle of saying, I don't think they're doing well in the polls, so I wouldn't vote for them, you would have a virtuous cycle in which they say, well, if I could just choose among any of them rather than disregard whatever polls there are and whatever I think their chances are, I'd really like to see this one. They would do better over time. So the way you ask a poll question can make a great deal of difference in how the reports of the poll are reported and then how that affects future polls. So it's not just eliciting a different answer, it's having a better effect on people's attitudes towards candidate when future polls are taken. That's it. Back to our regular programming. I'm going to be moving to California from Eugene, Oregon this week, and I'm not sure whether I'll be able to get everything together to give you a segment next weekend. I'll do my best to get there, and if not, as soon as I'm set up, I'll let you know what's happening, or I'll try to post some kind of short, brief thing about what's going on and how soon you can expect to find me here again. If you'd like to help support this channel, you can go to my politicaldharma.com website, make a one-time donation, or you can go to my Patreon account at patreon.com/politicaldharma and become a recurring donor monthly, very small amounts that I've offered you. And I am going to do some privileged access for people who are Patreon members. And one thing, if I'm sure going to begin to do once I get settled in California, is I'm going to make these available without commercials to those of you who are Patreon members. That's it. I'll be back next week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see how things develop. Been an interesting year, right? Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.